En el nombre del Padre, y del Hijo, y del Espíritu Santo. Good morning. So, the memories I cherish the most about my abuelita growing up in New York City was that anyone who entered her house, she would sit them down at the table and then disappear into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she would reappear with a cup of coffee and sit it in front of the person with a light snack of crackers, sorullitos, tostones, or amarillitos, typical snacks in Puerto Rico. Now, the thing is that she never offered. She just always gave and did it from the very little income that she had. She kept a watch out the window for the mail carrier, Garcia, who she would welcome every day with a cup of espresso. Then there was also the upstairs neighbor's niece, who lived with mental health conditions that were brought upon by substance use. She was kicked out of her aunt's house, and she was left unsheltered. My abuelita would send me to the corner store to get a quarter-pound of salami and make the young woman a sandwich and offer her a cup of coffee when nobody else would. No matter who it was, they can always expect at least a cup of coffee from my abuelita. This was a custom that I inherited from her. And it wasn't until years later, researching the culture of my indigenous ancestors for an anthropology class, that I discovered that this is how our ancestors welcomed anyone who came into one of our yucadiques, or our villages. They'd serve them a drink without asking and brought them food. It was an act of peace and of friendship. While much of the ways of the life of the Arahuaque or Taino Boricuas, my ancestors, doesn't exist anymore, traces can still be found in the day-to-day life of the Puerto Rican community. It is an example that we are still here. Now, today's gospel reading happens to be one of my favorite gospel stories. I quickly responded to Justin's suggestion on preaching on it, because it's my favorite. This gospel story always intrigued me as a kid, and later on in life, this story helped me accept that God loves me and is okay with me being queer, and that there is a seat at the table for me just as I am. Now, I will share that every time I read this gospel story, these siblings, the story about these siblings, I always imagine these siblings being me and my siblings. I'm the youngest of three. My parents had a daughter, a son, and then me. The best of both in one. My brother is Lazarus, the one who always was amongst his friends telling the stories, the old, I caught a fish this big story. Always had a big story to tell. My sister is Martha. She's the one who's always concerned about getting the tasks done and getting them done right and just doing it while she suffered in silence. A very loud silence. And then there was me, of course. Guessed it. I'm Mary. The random one. The one that no one knows what to expect from next. They can always count on one thing, though, that anything I did was always going to be extra. It was like, oh, Lord, yep, that's Stephen. Oh, Lord, there he goes again. That's Stephen for you. What's he doing now? Well, that's right, Stephen. And I was also the one who was always faithfully by my abuelita's side. Now, today's gospel transports us back to Bethany, just before the triumphant entry. We have Lazarus and his family hosting a dinner party shortly after his resurrection. He's at the table with his guest of honor, Jesus, and I can just hear it now, his stories. Oh, the silence was incredible. I've never experienced anything like that. It was golden. Now the smell was worse than a locker room, but that silence was incredible. And hey, in the future, Can you throw in a few non-perishables? After 4 days of being in a tomb, I was rather hungry. Then you have Martha serving without complaining. She probably had learned her lesson and understood the importance of her gift of hospitality. However, something tells me that in the back of her mind, she was wondering where Mary was. Everything's going just as planned. And then along comes Mary with an 11-ounce bottle of Chanel No. 5, valued at 1 year's worth, pouring it on Jesus' worth of wage, pouring it on Jesus' feet and uncovering her head to wipe his feet with her hair. Lazarus is probably thinking, oh Lord, there goes Mary again. How embarrassing. Martha's probably thinking, I knew it. Jesus should have listened to me in the first place. She would have been kept busy and would have learned her lesson to not be so random. And then, of course, there are the guests, probably running for the closest window or door to get a breath of fresh air. I would be reaching for my asthma inhaler. That's right. Now, it has been my experience that this story is usually used to teach a lesson on giving in abundance or about greed. It's also a story that's always been romanticized. But for me, every time I read this passage, I see the story of a close spiritual friendship. While Mary's act does seem a little random at first glance, a closer look will reveal that what she did was intentional and meant to be intimate. An act that would have shocked the people of her time, since it was a patriarchal culture of its time and it had specific dualistic behavioral norms and expectations for males and for females, especially when it came to rabbis. Mary wasn't ignorant of it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Hidden in her plan, in plain sight, we see the act of an exchange that revealed a deep, intimate bond. A deep friendship that defies cultural norms and roles and standards, that was willing to surrender them all and obey the spiritual law of pure godly love that transcends all of human understanding and dollar signs. Now, to get a better understanding of this friendship, we have to hit rewind and go back in scriptures. Prior to the anointing, we meet Mary at Jesus' feet, taking in his teaching, as Martha is bustling around and irritated with Mary in the kitchen for not helping her. Martha demands Jesus to tell Mary to help her, but instead, Jesus defriends his beloved friend, Mary, validating her for her act of devotion. Here we start seeing a spiritual bond growing between the two. The writer of the book, The Cloud of Unknowing, explains it this way. Talking about Mary. But she forgot all this and was totally absorbed in the highest wisdom of God concealed in the obscurity of his humanity. Mary turned to Jesus with all the love of her heart, unmoved by what she saw or heard spoken or done about her. She sat there in perfect stillness with her heart's secret, joyous love intent upon the cloud of unknowing between her and her God. So as time goes by, the next time we see Mary and Martha is 4 days after Lazarus had been laid to rest. Now watch carefully what happens. Mary and Martha are mourning in their home. Jesus is making his way to Bethany. Martha hears about it, and she leaves Mary behind to go meet Jesus. They have a little chat, and then the story reads, when she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. Wasn't true? And then she heard this, and she got up quickly and she went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. And we fast forward a little bit, blah, blah, blah. When Jesus saw her weeping, and all the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." When I read this passage, I picked up on two things. First thing I picked up on was that Jesus never did call for Mary. For some reason, Martha knew that Mary needed the help, the hope, and the comfort of her friends. She made up the story. Second thing I noticed, Jesus became deeply disturbed after seeing Mary and the others weeping, and then he wept. I believe in my heart that Jesus' heart ached to see his beloved friend in the deep pain of her grief, so much so that it brought him to tears. In his writings titled Spiritual Friendships Distilled, St. Aldred of Rievaulx writes this: although this definition may not be entirely sufficient, let us start by unpacking it a bit. Friends are companions who enjoy a common accord in relations to shared interests, not necessarily agreeing on everything, but generally singing to the same key, so to speak. This harmony is coupled with affection, which is enjoyment of simply being in each other's presence, and goodwill, which involves wishing to the other person the ultimate good. When we wish for what is good for our friend, we become guardians of their soul, rejoicing with them in their joys, weeping with their sorrows. As best we can, we try to feel our friends' feelings, as if they were our own. Friendship, therefore, is a virtue by which the spirit becomes fastened together by a love that makes one out of many. This oneness in love is eternal. In fact, of all human relationships, friendship alone continues to persist practically unchanged in heaven. The wise King Solomon affirmed this when he said, "A friend's love forever." The oneness that Aldred was speaking of is where the two knew each other's hearts and knew what each other was thinking that no words could express. They felt what each other was feeling. It was a spiritual connection. And it is what we see taking place in today's gospel reading. Mary knew Jesus very well in everything that he taught. She experienced his liberating truth and knew that that truth was pissing off the religious and political leaders of the time. Jesus had been throwing bricks of justice for a community of misfits and standing close by to them as a true friend when the bricks were being thrown back. Jesus' bricks were getting bigger and bigger, and he knew that a big one was about to be thrown back. He was ready for it. Mary felt it. Mary knew that her beloved friend was about to pay the ultimate price and had come to terms with it. This would probably be her final moments with him, and in a prophetic gesture, an expression of devotion of her spiritual friendship. He didn't refuse or reject her offering because he knew it was an exchange of love between them in their spiritual friendship. Now, for me personally, I don't think the story ends there. I believe that Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are the same person. I believe that in that mystical moment we read about today, was the moment where Mary was given a new name, just like Peter got one. Magdalene, the tower, to watch over everything that he taught, because Mary got it. And it connected her to Jesus. So much so that we see her sharing in his suffering on the road to Calvary. Now, at the beginning of my sermon, I mentioned that this story was a story that helped me accept that God loved me unconditionally as a queer person, and that there was a seat at the table for me just as I am. Probably wondering how so. God's heart is revealed to us in the life of Jesus, who broke cultural norms and befriended people. He befriended the woman, which was very unheard of his time. He also befriended the woman accused of adultery, the Samaritan woman, a centurion, tax collectors, the poor, the criminal, the non-Jews, the ill, Judas Iscariot, and even Peter. Those friendships revealed a love that goes beyond societal norms and customs and includes all people and excludes none. It wraps its arms of love around us regardless of what we have done or what we have left undone. A love that sets a place at the table with others just like me. At the table just as I was created, not to be lectured about what society or the church says is right or wrong, but where I'm asked, how are you, my friend? And all that is asked in return is that we love each other deeply as Jesus showed us. So as we start drawing closer to the end of Lent, we approach Good Friday. I like to take this time to remember that the crucifixion was actually a total act of true spiritual friendship, where Jesus surrendered his divinity to share in our suffering. He took the ultimate brick, the brick for all of humanity.